I proclaim with all the power that is in me that the Inside Out podcast is the only true and living podcast on the face of the whole earth, with which I, Bruce Reginald McConkie, am well pleased, speaking under the podcast collectively as well as individually.
Hello and welcome to Inside Out Live. I'm Ian Wilkes. I'm your co-host. I'm coming to you all the way from the reluctant 51st state of the United States of America. We love Americans, but we don't want to be owned by America. But anyway, we have our other co-host podcaster. He's in that direction. You know who he is. Jim Bennett, welcome.
Thank you, Ian Wilkes.
Well, Jim, we have another exciting live episode for all of our guests, listeners, and viewers this evening. In fact, this lady is my favorite podcaster, alongside with you, Jim. And we want to give the best welcome, the warmest welcome to Rebecca Bibliotheca.
Oh, thank you, guys. I'm still laughing over that intro. I have not heard your intro before. And yeah, that made me laugh. Bruce, sorry. That was great.
AI can do all kinds of disturbing things.
AI can do a lot. It's true.
Rebecca, it's a real honor to have you on Inside Out this evening. We're so excited. We've got an amazing program for our viewers this evening. I also want to let people know that you are the co-host of Mormonish podcast. We love the podcast. We love all the work that you do. And you are also the recipient of the prestigious William Law Ex-Mormon Award. Tell us about that.
I know that is shocking. And it's for 2025. The Brody Awards ceremony was at the couple weeks ago. And somehow I was awarded this incredible honor of Ex-Mormon of the Year. And I actually have, it doesn't come with a physical award, but my co-host, he's so nice. He had this made for me. I think it cost $10 engraved. So there it is. I'm super proud of it. And I always make the joke, my TBM children would be so proud, right? If they knew, which they don't. So, but yeah, it was presented for the work that I and a lot of others, I feel like I was kind of like this kind of just a point where information gathered, but our work on the Fairview, City Council, Temple, all of that, which was ongoing for several years. So I think everybody just thought, oh my gosh, she's put so many years of her life into it. Let's throw her a bone and give her an award. So yeah, that was pretty amazing.
That's fantastic. Tell us any updates on what's happening with the Colorado Springs City Council.
Yeah.
Because your podcast, you're probably the best out there at tracking, monitoring all the news. I go to your podcast for news. Incredible source of valuable information. Tell us what's happening and give us your opinion on the way things are going to go.
Oh, yeah, no, I'd be happy. I am kind of just like somebody who's always scouring the news. And, when I talk about Fairview and the 2 years that we've all kind of been following that, we sort of became aware of this playbook that the LDS Church has and what it does behind the scenes to kind of push these temples forward, right? And we like to think, and we're pretty proud of the idea that we sort of shone a spotlight on how all that works. And I think a lot of our viewers and listeners here in the chat could say, oh yeah, I know exactly how it goes. I know exactly what they're going to say when they stand in front of the city council and talk about the spire. They're going to say, you can probably all quote it, draws your eyes heavenward, where heaven and earth meet. It's my religious right, or lupa. And so it's so interesting. The Colorado Springs Temple, I haven't been as involved in that. I get information from people. That's how I know. And if I don't get any information from anybody, then it's not on my radar. So I only recently started to get information about Colorado Springs. And today was their final approval in front of the city council. And as those LDS members stood up, those words that I just rehearsed, that's exactly what they said. It draws my eyes up, and I'm just like, yes, bingo card, bingo card, bingo card, And in this case, somebody had given me an email just 2 days ago, and I talked about this on the newscast, where it went out to one of the stakes there in the Temple District, and it said, the Temple Department of the church is carefully curating and crafting what the people who have been selected to address the city council will say. Wow, that's really saying it out loud. We know that happens, but here they said it out loud. They also said in this email, if you are asked by the city council in Colorado Springs to address the city council, and I can imagine, like, what if you are neighbors with the city council member, and the city council member says, hey, Jim, I know you're LDS. Do you want to come and give a review of the temple to the city council? Well, you should be able to do that, right? You have the right to address the city. This email says, if you are asked to address the council, politely decline. And so that really got under my skin right there, because I thought, people that put themselves in an organization that has the right to tell you not, and you obey them, not to go and voice your opinion in a city council, which is your right, whatever you want to say. I had a problem with that. But so the vote was today. It was a very long city council meeting with the church presenting and residents that had been selected standing up. There were a lot of tears. There always are when they're talking about how important the temple is to them. And the people that were the opposition, I'm guessing in the chat, they can list that too. Height and bright, right? Every single time, that's all they're talking about. We'd love you to build a temple. Height and bright, right next to my house, right? Every time. I just don't know why they keep doing it. But in this case, the residents group, there weren't too many of them there. And I had communicated with one of the legal team there a week ago, and they had never heard of Fairview. So, that's not it. It's out there. The information is out there, the playbook, and you can study that and you can use that to try to have a better outcome, a fair outcome for everyone. But that didn't happen in this case. And so it was unanimously voted that the temple can just be built as is. It's going to be light, and it's going to be bright, and it's going to be height, 140 feet. And that's what happened just this afternoon. So that's the update on Colorado Springs. So there it is. And contrary to popular belief, I and Mormonish, we do not go out there and stir things up in towns where temples are being built. We are often contacted by people that say, hey, I think you might know something about temples. They're building one. What does this mean exactly? What can we as residents expect? What maybe can we do? And only then do we ever get involved. Many places temples are built, and there's no issue in a neighborhood. They fit in and they're just fine. So, but yeah, the rumor is apparently that Landon, my co-host on Mormonish, and I fly around to places where they have announced temples, and that we stir up the neighborhood. This is, I have a couple temple insiders that work, are part of the temple department. And that's the rumor, that we go out and actually agitate. And I wish I had the money to fly around to every temple building town. That would be a great vacation, but no, that does not happen. So.
Was there a debate on this with the council? Did they debate it? Did they bring the rest of the public?
In this case, not really, because the residents, I had somebody watch the entire meeting. She just contacted me today. She said, I'm a city council member in another town. I've watched all your podcasts about temple building. I have been part of another temple scenario. I won't say where to out this person, but she said, I watched it. And she said, I saw that the residents, who had brought this appeal had a hard time articulating, as they do. And she said, I saw the people from the LDS church being extremely articulate, because as we learned from the email, the temple department has handcrafted the statements that they're making, right? And she said, I saw the city council just going, this sounds great. This sounds, kind of being enamored by the whole, right. It sounds amazing, right? The pomp, the circumstance, the tears, all of that. And it just unanimously passed. So it's hard in city government. You know this, Jim. It's hard when people come before you and present, and there's emotion and all that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, they seem to be very, excited about having the temple there as high and as bright as they wanted it.
Jim, what's your take on this? The church, Rebecca and Lana's doing a fantastic job tracking all the activities with the church, with Fairview and the Colorado Springs. Phenomenal job. What's your take, Jim, on what's driving that church assertiveness, aggression to get its way with these cities councils? What's behind it? What do you think, Jim?
What's behind their aggressiveness?
Or assertiveness at pushing their design into the city council. I know the municipal procurement process from Canada. It's very similar to what's happening in the States. So I've gone through that process, often with big projects, very large projects. There's a whole technique and psychology around positioning and planning for these projects. I'm talking about billion-dollar projects, which requires a whole sophisticated approach from these big global engineering companies. So I've seen it from a consulting perspective. But from your government and other insights, Jim, what do you see is behind? Why is the church asserting its position on the temple design, its height, and pushing its agenda, if you like, and pressurizing these smaller city councils?
Yeah, and before you answer, let me say that most of these towns look at other temples and go, we would be totally happy with what you built in your Belinda. Why can't that come here? Right. And the answer is always, Jesus wants this temple at this height, at this bright, in this place. And our hands are tied. But every town is very reasonable. And the residents saying, why can't we have this one? Like in Anchorage, very small, so it is interesting, Jim, that they really do insist on a certain type in a certain town.
Well, no, we saw under President Nelson particularly, and it will be interesting to see if this continues under President Oaks, because I don't think President Oaks has the same sort of obsession with temple building that President Nelson did. And President Nelson very much, I think, and we've talked about this many times, but I think temple growth is the one sort of element of growth that the church can control from soup to nuts. They can decide when to build a temple. They have ample resources to build as many temples as they want. And so I'm sure we'll talk about this when we start talking about President Oaks and his address today. But when you're seeing problems with growth in terms of membership numbers, one of the best ways to boost morale and the best ways to sort of project an image of strength is to build these temples and to grow these temples and to get big cheers at the end of General Conference for announcing a bazillion temples. And so I think that's kind of where this came from, is that President Nelson particularly felt, and depending on where you situate, I mean, I very much believe that there's inspiration behind a lot of that as well. I mean, you can look at that and say, look, we are temple building people and we now have the resources to build temples, and, off we go. But I think that drives sort of an overabundance of zeal that I think the thing that drove me crazy about Fairview, for instance, particularly, is that we're not only a temple building people, but we are a missionary people. And I think the bad feelings from how we handled Fairview particularly are going to last for at least a generation, if not more.
People and Cody, I'll add Cody to that, and Lone Mountain. Really, yes, you are not exaggerating.
No, I mean, they're going to make us. They're going to remember us as bullies.
Yeah. Yep.
And so that's the thing that really frustrates me with all of this, and I think it's been demonstrated time and again that the kinds of excuses that, oh well, Jesus demands a big steeple. Well, then why doesn't he demand a big steeple in Tokyo, Japan? Why doesn't he demand a big steeple? There are plenty of temples that don't even have steeples. And I always go back to my cousin Grant Bennett, who was an area authority 70 and was tasked by the church to get a steeple on top of the Boston Temple or the Belmont Temple, which was built initially without a steeple as a compromise because they didn't want a steeple. And Grant spent a great deal of time building relationships with the city council in an organic sort of way. It took a couple of years after the temple was built before the city council finally approved a steeple. I would like to see that approach followed rather than we're the big church with billions of dollars and we can do whatever we want approach. I think long-term that's self-defeating. Yeah.
Okay, so let's pivot now to President Oaks. Before you do, I want a quick response to what you just said. I think Nelson went too far, too fast on temples. We know that because President Oaks has put a moratorium. It slowed it down. I think President Oaks is panicking, thinking, hey, Nelson, this is going way too fast, is slowed the whole program down. I think you used the word pause. I think the church has got its priorities wrong. $2 billion on temples. What about the living? Spending way too much money on the dead. You should spend money on the living. That's what I think. Anyway, let's talk about President Oaks. So today, President Oaks gave an address to BYU, and very keen. You've both listened to his address, and you're prepared for this conversation. As we move into that, as you both probably know, I was interviewed personally, privately, with President Oaks for a calling on the stake presidency here in Canada. Cal Cook was his junior companion. That's how he was introduced to me from President Oaks. It was just me, Oaks, and Cook in the meeting. The meeting was very constructive. I got along with President Oaks, and him and I, he asked me some pretty direct questions. He asked me, is there anything in my past? That was the first question. Anything in my past that could harm the church? That was the first question. And the second question is, how do I want to be remembered? And I paused at that question, looked him in his eye, and I took that as something personal. How do I want to be remembered in my life? My contribution to life on the planet, but also my contribution to the calling. We had a wonderful conversation. We were then called, sustained, set apart by President Oaks, who set me apart. And we then spent all afternoon with him getting some training, and I had dinner right next to him. So I sat next to him for quite some time, and we had a private conversation about a whole bunch of stuff. This was the time when there was that Arab Spring, if you remember that, back in 2010. I found this is when I was really into the church, really committed, devoted, as more than probably any time in my entire life. And I found the whole experience very uplifting and very constructive. But I remember the question he asked me about how I want to be remembered. So as I was listening to his remarks today, I was thinking about that personal encounter with him. It's not the first time I've met him or had conversations with him. There was other conversations in Edinburgh, back in Scotland, where I served as a bishop at that time, and I've always had this enormous respect for him. And if you remember, Jim, Ben B. Banks, our mission president, said to the missionaries at that time, when back in Scotland, he said, "Keep an eye on President Oaks. He is someone to watch and someone to follow and respect." And I did, and I've respected and admired him in many ways. However, this last address that he gave, amongst other ones, frankly, I am very, very disappointed. I'm going to hold back for a moment here on some of my comments, because some of the things he said are quite triggering for me. But I want to get your thoughts and comments and overview of what you thought about his address. Rebecca, you listen to it. Tell us what you think, and then we'll have some time over to Jim.
Yeah, I was at work, so I knew that it was going to be happening, and I knew everybody was excited because it's the first sort of prophetic large address, right? As a prophet, he's going to be speaking to this whole group. So I think everybody was very excited. So I was at work trying to and then somebody on the side messaged me and said, "Are you listening to President Oaks? They're talking about you guys." And I'm like, "You guys who? Like me personally? Oh dear." No, you guys, post-Mormon podcasters, that niche where you may be more nuanced, more post-Mormon, and maybe turning a critical eye. They're talking about you. So then I had to, jump on, forget the clients, right? And I had to see what was going on. And as I read through the transcript, I'm like, wow, some of these quotes are really interesting. So I quickly copied them. I put them into some memes and I started posting them and got a lot of traction. People were extremely interested in the things that President Oaks was saying this. I think they were surprised. I think it's sort of like my co-host Landon said this. He goes, it's like you're in a company and all of a sudden there's a new CEO and he gathers you in the auditorium. You've got your bagel and you got your coffee and you're going to listen to the vision that the CEO has for your company, or maybe he's going to address, something. Anyway, you want to hear what this new leader taking you forward is going to say. And he stands up and he goes, "Well, the customers are leaving, but that's okay. That's okay. Don't worry. And we're not going to change our product, but it's fine. It's fine. And, just have a good feeling about all of it." You sitting there as an employee would go, "Oh, that's kind of interesting," And I will say that, and that's of course a generalization, maybe a little bit of an exaggeration, but even some faithful podcasters jumped on this. I watched Jasmine's little short today, and her title was President Oak's topic is "Don't Leave." Very interesting choice. And of course, I don't know if we're going to be able to put some of those quotes up or if we want to read them, but the takeaway of don't listen to sources, that you deem or someone else has deemed not good, not truth-telling. Only, again, it's like that thing Celestial Talk, right? Where they said, only take counsel from those who believe. And so that was something that was very,
surround yourself with
polarizing.
Believers.
Yes.
Do you want me to play him a little bit? I've got him ready.
You could play it, or you could show. I sent you all of my, I made the quotes, but yeah, if you know right where they are, that's kind of the crux of what we'll be talking about today, I think, is just the idea that, don't worry if you find information you can't understand. God is going to reveal it later, and certainly don't, watch anything or listen to anything that is going to shake you in any way, and, talk to leaders and trusted sources. And I think some people, nuanced Mormons, maybe post-Mormons, are like, okay, that's that, and he also did admit out loud, RMs are leaving, people who are young are not doing what they should do on the covenant path, find a partner, get married. He's saying all this stuff out loud, it's kind of a Streisand effect. If I think faithful members might be going, wait, what? People are leaving?
You said faithful members are having doubts.
Yeah. And so that reveals a lot, who gets up and says that in your kind of inaugural address. But so there must, he must feel like he has to acknowledge that and get out in front of it, and then try to offer some, some hope, security, if people are noticing people around them leaving, and he wants to, offer some solutions to that, which was stay close to the Spirit, use the Holy Ghost in discerning information. And he did offer up those 4 ways that, you can be closer to the Spirit. So, but it was completely different, I think, than what a lot of people thought he was going to talk about.
Excellent.
So that's my take.
No, it's great opening comments there, initial view. Jim, what do you think?
No, I think that Rebecca's right on the money here, and I can understand, Ian, why you found so much of it triggering. I found it in some ways very encouraging, and I want to say what I mean by that. It is very, very clear that President Oakes understands precisely where the problems are, which is why, someone like Jasmine Rapley is sort of caught off guard, because the company line has been, we're growing, and this is just, we're going gangbusters. And President Oakes stood up and said, no, even faithful members are having doubts. Returned missionaries are leaving. People are not getting the Melchizedek priesthood. He is saying things that all of us who go to church anecdotally are seeing. We've talked about, Ian and I talked about our missions and the stigma that was attached to coming home early back when we were missionaries. I had this huge, bizarre fantasy of escaping by foot across Europe and changing my name and changing my identity. But that would be preferable to facing my family in disgrace going home early. Well, that's changed radically, because people come home early now all the time. But we don't hear about that in general conference. We hear, oh gosh, we've just gotten legions and massive amounts of growth here, there, and everywhere, and isn't this great? And President Oakes, one of the things that I found really, really encouraging is that there is no question that President Oakes is taking this new responsibility very seriously, and with a tremendous amount of humility. I mean, you go back and watch anything President Oakes said prior to becoming president of the church and see his demeanor now when he speaks. This is a man who very much feels the weight of the responsibility that has been given to him and is taking it very seriously. And I think is somewhat surprised. He even said this. One of the first things he said was, I'm surprised by what it is the Lord would have me say. I think he's surprised. Everybody, there were so many sort of tea leaf watchers who said, oh, when Oakes gets in, Family Proclamation is going to become canon, and it's going to be all anti-gay all the time. We haven't heard word one of any sort of anti-LGBTQ rhetoric from President Oaks since President Nelson died. He did give a talk on the Family Proclamation when in that apostolic interregnum, didn't mention LGBTQ issues at all. You know, it's really interesting to see that now he is the guy in the driver's seat. He is the guy. You know, in politics, we always say, well, you know, the elected official, he's the guy, right? All of us, we work for the guy, but the guy is the one who ends up making the decisions. And he's now the guy, and I think is sort of surprised by that. And so what I heard from this talk was a very savvy, clear articulation of what the real problems are. Now, he soft pedaled it to some degree, which I don't know that he has any choice but to do that. I mean, if he gets up there and says and gives us raw numbers of, you know, John DeLynn says, what is it? 80% of returned missionaries leave within 6 months or something like that. I mean, there are some really hairy numbers out there that the church has not confirmed or denied. But you got the sense from this talk that President Oaks very much is aware of where the problems are and is not interested in distractions. He's not interested in, I mean, I think President Nelson knew what the problems were, and his response was, well, let's just build a lot of temples, right? Here's what we're going to do in order, and hopefully the church will catch up. And President Oaks is now saying, no, we've got some serious problems. These are real problems. We have to address them. And Ian, I'm sure you're going to weigh in on this, where it became frustrating for me is that there weren't workable solutions to them. There was a certain degree of humility to, we don't necessarily have all the solutions, but or really any solutions. I mean, he didn't offer any sort of, he did talk about the idea of, you know, there are members, even faithful members, who are troubled by doctrine and history. But he didn't sort of offer, well, all they need to do is go read this, where we answer all those questions about doctrine and history. I mean, he didn't try to offer easy solutions. But what he did try to do is say, look, be patient, hang back, and in the meantime, retreat. Retreat from the world, retreat from your friends who are not believers. Surround yourself with people who believe. I think that's a direct quote.
Yeah.
You know, spend more. He told one story that I thought was just kind of maddening. Is this guy? He was at BYU and he was talking to a stake president, and he asked the stake president to mentor him in business. And the stake president was doing that, and finally this guy said, "Well, I've left the church. I'm leaving the church." And then the stake president bears this fervent testimony, and the guy stays. The guy goes, "Wow, I haven't heard that. Golly, you mean, oh, okay, well now," and you know, how many times do we talk to people who have left the church, and the first reaction of just about everybody when they hear that somebody they know has left the church is, well, I'm going to bear them just the most sincere testimony I can. And so many people who leave say it's maddening because I have real questions. I mean, the people who leave not because, you know, the stereotype, they want to sin, they want to drink coffee, they want whatever. They leave because they've been scrambling, trying to find a way to stay, trying to find a way to reconcile racist things that Brigham Young has said, or, you know, or whatever it is. I mean, we can go down whatever the list is, but they're leaving because they want the church to be true, and the church is not giving them the answers they're looking for, and instead they're bearing their testimony to them, they're shaming them. You know, just have a stronger testimony, and then you won't have to worry about it. Just be patient. And so I found it encouraging because the fact that President Oaks knows what the problems are also suggests he's smart enough to figure out eventually what the solutions are. And I was talking to somebody today that I won't identify, and everybody's going to say, well, Jim's talking to big. This is somebody that is fairly well connected with church leaders. And I said, look, this is not a general authority, blah, 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 blah. I'm not talking to the brethren, whatever it is. But I said, you know, these aren't solutions. you're just when you have the problem, but you don't have the solutions. And this person said, well, what if there are no solutions? I was like, oh, well, then I guess that would be a problem, isn't it? And I think there is a solution, and I'm sort of a broken record on this. Fallibility is the only way forward. Acknowledging fallibility, embracing the reality that we do not have all the answers, and we're not supposed to have all the answers, and we should accept that because we came to mortality for the purpose of learning from our mistakes, which means there are going to be legions of mistakes, and they're not just going to be individual mistakes, they are going to be institutional mistakes. And acknowledging that, embracing that, owning that is the only way forward. Everything else is a Band-Aid. And President Oaks offered a whole lot of Band-Aids today. And I think a lot of people were kind of disappointed because it was like, and I'm sure, Ian, you were, I'm almost done. I'll let you jump in here. But, they were disappointed by the fact that, oh, okay, you're acknowledging all these problems. And the answer is read my scriptures more and hang out with more members of the church and go to church every week.
And don't watch podcasts.
And don't listen to podcasts.
Nuanced or post perspective.
The thinking here, this has been the message for a very, very long time. And it ceased being effective as soon as the internet had democratized information. You can't tell people, just don't look at information, because information is ubiquitous. We can't help but look at information. When we were on our missions, Ian, the only way you could know that Joseph Smith had married a 14-year-old girl was to read some weird little pamphlet that some pastor had dropped on your doorstep, and it was usually misprinted, misspelled, and you could just dismiss it. This is nonsense. Well, now it's all online, and a lot of it is in church essays. It's all there, and it's there with 2 or 3 Google clicks. One Google click, it's there, and we have to address it. We have to deal with it. The thing that is maddening to me is that President Oaks, again, like so many church leaders, was pretending that we still have a choice as to whether or not we will confront all of the difficult issues in our past and in our present. And we do not have that choice. We do not have that luxury. We just don't. And this is not going to work unless we address everything head on. Now, I have enough faith, and I think President Oaks definitely has enough faith to recognize that the restored gospel can take it, right? We can take it. It's not such a fragile little sort of delicate thing that we just can't accept that there have been problems or there have been mistakes or there have been gross errors. Boyd K. Packer was the guy who said, the truth destroys faith. Well, if the truth destroys faith, then what the heck are we doing? Faith that isn't rooted in truth and that can't survive true information isn't worthwhile at all. So President Oaks said some things about science that I thought were very encouraging. So Ian, I know I'm about 10 seconds away from unleashing you, and I know that you're going to have a lot of.
Do we need earplugs? It's my first time on the show. I'm not sure what that means when Ian unleashes.
I'm not going to hold back.
He's not going to hold back. But the things that can't go on forever stop, and this can't go on forever. We can't continue to kick the can down the road. We can't just keep saying, oh, just don't worry about it, be patient. It's not. How patient do we have to be? How many generations of patience? How much generations of patience are necessary before we finally confront the difficult issues and move forward from there? Because there is a great future to be had beyond that threshold. The minute we can take accountability for our errors, take accountability for our missteps, and move forward is, I think, going to be a great day in the history of the church. But we keep postponing that day. I think Oaks is intelligent enough and plugged in enough and understands the problem enough that this can't go on forever and it will stop. The only thing that will prevent Oaks from stopping it is that he looked awfully, awfully frail to me. I really don't think. I remember when President Nelson took over at 93, I thought this guy's going to be in president of the church for a decade, and he was essentially, or almost. But I don't know how long we're going to have President Oaks, and I hope that he comes to this realization sooner rather than later. So, Ian, with all of that, you loved it, right? It was your favorite talk.
I'll do my very best. Okay. This address will go down as one of the most significant, defining, troubling talks of any living prophet. President Oaks had an opportunity here to address some real issues with leadership and insight. He failed, in my opinion. He failed to deliver. A couple of weeks ago, Mark Carney, the Canadian Prime Minister, gave this historical speech in Davos at the Economic Forum there. You probably have seen that. So what's he done since then? Scant little. This is very similar to the Mark Carney talk, where there is some slogans, sound bites, sounds great. There's conviction. He has authority in his voice as President Oaks. He's got that reassuring authority. But here's the problem. Yes, he understands the issues and the problem. He listed them in his talk. He organized and structured his talk around four main components, four main elements. I'll tell you what they are. Strengthen our faith in him, increase our humility, seek help from others, and be patient. Throughout the entire structure of the talk, it was controlling and manipulative. It was very binary. If you strip that talk down, it's basically, his way or the highway, or the church's way or the highway. Don't do this, don't do that, do more of this, etc. Controlling the narrative and trying to tell people in this day and age where to go for their information, for reliable, trustworthy information, is absolutely ridiculous. So you could argue, in one sense, he is intelligent enough to understand the nature of the problems. And I buy that, I get that. But then the intelligence runs out very quickly when it comes to prescribing solutions. For example, in seeking help from others. To do that, what does that mean? You've got to ask faithful questions. You can't ask difficult questions. The church is not safe to ask these questions. You can't go to your members of the church, the bishop, the priesthood, religious society, and ask these questions, the difficult questions. You've got to ask certain questions. And if they're not faithful, then you are in trouble. And that was my whole experience. Humility is also leadership. It's owning the fact that you have a problem and addressing the problem. And instead of trying to control the narrative, and the ship has sailed on that. Good luck with that. And the idea of trying to control the narrative in today's world is just unrealistic. It's unintelligent. So you've got this very intelligent individual who I know is intelligent, having worked with him, very smart individual. But the slogans and the sound bites with no specifics. It talks about, don't go listen to podcasts, pray more. These are the last days. You're going to have to cling to the Holy Ghost. You got to go to the temple, keep on the covenant path, etc. You're going to be, the devil is disguising all this information. That's a cult way of thinking. When you're trying to control the narrative and control the parameters in which people learn and grow, and keep them on this very strict prescribed path, and tell them to only look at scientific information in a very measured way. I mean, you can't disprove what he's saying in regards to God. Man's way is this way and God's is higher. That's very intelligent and it's very smart, because you can't disprove that. You can't disprove that there's no God, or there's no, God doesn't know more. So I'm troubled and I'm disappointed, because we've been talking for quite some time, including with Greg Prince, about the opportunity right now on this planet, with all that's going on in the world, for the prophet of God, who he was introduced, President Oaks was introduced. Do you remember how he was introduced? He was introduced as the mouthpiece of God before he gave his remarks. That carries significance, not just a mouthpiece for the members, but for the entire world, right? The entire world. And I was hoping that he would do something different to what the previous prophets have done and said, that he would address the geopolitical issues, the the risk to the Constitution of the United States, which the church claims to be inspired of God, talking about the real issues of the day. Instead, in contrast to Elder Rasband, by the way, who tells us that the church is growing faster than at any time in history. And we covered a podcast on that, I think, a couple of weeks ago, right? You've got this Rasband narrative that the church is doing great. More and more missions are going out, more and more people are getting baptized. That's the essence of his talk. In sharp contrast to Oakes, who was acknowledging the problem and clearly panicking, running scared, acknowledging to the membership as a whole, it's not just the BY audience, that yes, these problems exist, we're aware of them, but instead of providing specifics and resources, for example, for helping people address issues, which he clearly didn't, he's basically doubling down. Pray more, have more patience. If you don't get the answer in this life, hey, you'll get it in the next life. Eternity is a long way. It was a missed opportunity. He failed to deliver. I expected more of him, and I'm disappointed. And the question, President Oakes, if you see this, and I say this with love and respect, I throw the question back at you that you asked me personally in that interview back in 2010. My question to you is, your question to me is, how do you want to be remembered? And I still hope that at some point you will address the big issues of the day, and we will have an honest, mature, adult conversation about the issues affecting the church. It's okay to say we made mistakes. We're fallible. Jim has given excellent discourses on that. Just read his material. I would respect you more if you said you're human, you make mistakes. I would have so much more respect if we just admitted that we got things wrong and that we can do better. And I know we can, and I still hold out. Rebecca, back to you in regards to any other comments or thoughts on President Oakes. You, this co-host of Mormonish, you've got a wonderful group of people that listen to you, follow you. What, as you've tracked this today and you've kind of monitored this, what have you seen out there in this big, bad, evil podcast land?
That's right, on the dark side. No,
the dark side. Oakes tells us we are the ones to avoid. Exactly. What are you seeing, and what feedback are you getting from your listeners and your viewers?
Yeah, people are frustrated. And I will talk about, I think, this darker side of the talk that maybe people don't recognize when you are in a mixed faith family, which a lot of us are. And when our faithful family members are told, like the talk, Think Celestial, again, that you should not really be talking to a family member who's questioning or has stepped away or stepped really far away. And I'm just going to really quickly read the two quotes that I pulled out because I'm sensitive to this, because I have immediate family members that are in the church, and that's wonderful. And the church works for them and they're flourishing. But when they hear things like this from, as you pointed out, Ian, the mouthpiece of God, it impacts how they look at a family member who is not on the same path. And there's a lot of pain there, especially when it's maybe a mom talking about her kids, kids looking at their parents, all of that. And not everybody sees that. So one part of his talk where he said, remember, to survive spiritually, you will need the constant influence of the Holy Ghost. And this was a theme throughout that, information, whatever you hear, just run everything through the filter of the Holy Ghost. An abundance of speculation and false information in podcasts. Okay, so right there, if any faithful family member is involved in being on podcasts or anything, your faithful family member is going to look at you and go, wow, the prophet is calling you out right there. And on social media surround us. Some may protest or question the truth of church doctrine without knowing or even understanding the fullness of the doctrine. And that was another theme throughout. You just don't know yet. It may seem at odds now with science or wisdom of the world or of man, but if you hold on long enough, everything will align. Yeah, kind of like the priesthood banner reminds me of. Just hold on for another couple hundred years. It'll be fine. But here's the part where I think it just gets a little dark and painful for a lot of people. Don't be persuaded by false or inaccurate information. Discuss your concerns with faithful, well-informed friends, and always take those concerns to the Lord. So that's one place where he said, you know who you need to be talking to. You don't have a conversation with your family member who maybe has questions or is nuanced. You stay away from that person. They're almost like they're infected. They might say something that you hear, right? So the other quote was shorter. He said, a third way, and you discussed the 4 steps, to draw closer to our Savior is to associate with other believers. This includes discussions with trusted associates, local church members, and other faithful friends. So he did not go as far as President Nelson did when he said, only take counsel, do not take counsel from these people. But he definitely left this impression that, the people you're supposed to be talking to and gravitating towards, the people you're not supposed to be listening to. And in many cases, that's your family. So I just kind of am sensitive to that. I think maybe some people in the chat are sensitive to that. And, that's a dark tone for people. It's disappointing. And it puts faithful and those that have stepped away or are nuanced in an awkward position with each other. I don't know if you guys sense that out of that.
No, I agree with that. And the thing that has changed since now President Oaks joined the Quorum of the 12 is that I don't think there is a family in the church. I will go this far. Mm-hmm. I don't think there is a family in this church that doesn't have either an immediate family member or somebody very close that has left. The church, and there are so many mixed faith marriages in the church now. So what do you do when you're told by the president of the church and the mouthpiece of God that you shouldn't be talking to people who don't believe when you're married to one? This is not an issue that I have ever had. I remember I was invited. Do you know Alan Mount? Does he still do his Marriage on a Tightrope podcast?
I don't know if they do that, but they did for a long time and really had a very positive impact on so many people in that scenario, which is just a heartache.
Well, at one point he invited me and he said, I'd love you and your wife to come on. And my wife does not do this. I mean, this is not her thing. She's a physical therapist. This is just not her thing. And she said to me, and I've never forgotten this, she said, you and I have had all kinds of problems throughout our marriage. Our faith has never been one of them. I am fortunate and blessed enough that we've always essentially been on the same page there. But I look at people who are not. I look at people who struggle with that. I had lunch with an old friend who he's literally an old friend because he's older than me. And I don't want to get too specific, but he's leaving the church and he'd been in the church forever. And he's married to a woman who's very much a true believer. And it's just agony because the church not only doesn't provide any sort of encouragement or tools for that, what they do provide are all kinds of incentives to put a wedge in your marriage. And the difference in belief is already wedge enough that it's just, this is the challenge. And I'm reading things, for instance, RFM at one point here. We should probably go to some of these comments.
He's being so snarky in the chat, isn't he?
Yeah, well, yeah.
I'm monitoring him right there, like I always do.
President Oaks is starting to look like a bobblehead version of himself. I don't think that's true, actually. I think President Oaks looks much more stately now than he used to. I think he was bobbleheadedly more before that. But he said something along the lines of at what point do you stop following them? At what point do you stop believing them?
That's a good point.
And it is a good point because they want to have their cake and eat it too. They want you to recognize that they're fallible while treating them as if they're infallible. And that does not work. And the thing that's amazing, and as I've pounded this drum of fallibility, I get all of these stories. Some are family stories, and some are from other people who've had these one-on-one conversations with church leaders, where in person and one-on-one in private, they admit all of it. They admit, oh yeah, oh, we don't know what to do with this, and we don't know what to do with that. And we're at our wits' end, but none of that bleeds through in any sort of public address. And that tension and that dichotomy, it's not sustainable. Long term, it's going to have to resolve one way or the other.
we want to get into some of the questions. I just want to quick respond. I am out the church. I still hold on to the goodness of the church, right? We talked earlier before we started our podcast of our wonderful memories, Rebecca, growing up, right? You as well, Jim. Went to the dances, road shows. It's so, I joined when I was 16. It was so rich. It was so wonderful. And so I will never forget those things or deny those positive experiences. There's so much inherent goodness within the church. And all we want to do is improve it, get it better, make it more inclusive and to make it better for everybody, right? And I can't understand why such intelligent people can't deal with the issues, right? And just be mature about it. And where's the moral authority in the world that we need right now from the prophet of God on the earth today? President Oakes, you can do more, you can do better. I believe in you. I believe that you can do this. I'm disappointed, but you're a smart guy, and I know that. Jim, let's go through some of the questions.
There are a lot of these are comments and not questions. Guy McDude asked some really thoughtful questions before we started, and that could take this in a whole other direction.
Okay.
So we want to know they're there, but I want to get through these.
Yeah, let's do it.
Topic at hand.
Okay.
RFM asks, who is the coolest podcaster after RFM? We've already determined that that's Rebecca Bibliotheca.
Rebecca.
Got an award.
Okay. Let's see. Just going through. I've gone all the way back. Jim and Ian only accept spiritual super chats despite the janky studio equipment. So we need to.
We're learning. We
are learning, and we're getting. I have this ring light here that isn't working. That's making.
We're at the telestial level, and we're aiming for the celestial. Right.
But we're going to get to terrestrial here fairly quickly. We've got temples are great marketing tools. The more visible, the better. Let's see, and there's some conversation about that. There aren't a lot of questions. Oh, here's a question. Wouldn't it be nice if these prophets and apostles would pull out their seer stones and get revelation on all these difficult questions people are facing?
I think it's nailed it, right? The Book of Mormon is very clear. I
always have this right beside me.
Very nice.
There we go. Rebecca, you could put your head in the hat right now and get a revelation, right?
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I just thought it was funny because this is always right here. This is where I get all my podcasting ideas.
There we go.
I come up with these on my own?
Jim, we need a stone in the hat to get some revelation. That last question is so important because the prophet is a seer and a revelator. The prophet knows things that we don't know, right? He sees things that we don't see. He feels things that we don't feel, and so we expect that role. If he's fallible and he makes mistakes, that's the problem, right? And
but I mean that is the problem, is that they sell that.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's true. I think they encounter God the same way we do.
Right. I mean, he said that he didn't know much about the pre-existence and he didn't know much about the spiritual life. Remember in his talk. But that last question is really important because if you set yourself up here as an expert, like in industry or whatever, right? People have expectations, right? They expect that you could perform and deliver. We have great expectations on the prophet because of his role in his ecclesiastical priesthood authority, which he also talked about in his talk as well. So, if you don't want the expectations, don't claim to be something that you're not. And if you are that person, deliver, right? Deliver. Open that hat, get the stone in, get it working, brush off the cobwebs. If you need one, Rebecca's got one right here.
I've got one right here. It works really well.
It works for Rebecca. It can work for you too. Any other questions?
Where did you get that hat?
I think I got it online as a prop for something I did for book club once.
Isn't that a song?
I've tried it. Sometimes that's right. So you reminded me of part of the talk that I thought was interesting. And, of course he said, stay away from podcasts, talking about a lot of us. But he also then said, also kind of beware of well-meaning people who claim to know about the pre-existence and the afterlife.
Yes,
and I thought, now that is interesting. Is he finally... And I have been calling this forever,
Visions
and so has RFM and Bill, visions of glory. That is exactly where my mind went. He did call them well-meaning, but these are, groups of people in books and literature, near-death experiences, talking about, I knew you in the past. I was Nephi's wife. I mean, the extreme, of course, is Lori, and Chad and all of that horrificness, Jody Hildebrandt, all of that. They believe in that. I've never heard them address any of this. He said, well-meaning people who know about your past life and can talk about, life after death, be careful of that. So I thought that was fascinating. I'm glad you brought that up, Ian. Yeah.
Very positive.
Yeah.
I need to point out that RFM announces in the chat why he left the church specifically. So I think that's helpful.
I think if everyone weighed in, they all have that same reason. I feel like that really might be it. So.
And I think our Sean Connery in the pre-Earth life.
Don't do that accent.
How is that possible? Because he lived at the same time Sean Connery did. That doesn't work. It can't be. Anyway.
So I have a comment about fallibility as we were talking about that. Yeah. Fallibility is their escape hatch for the bad actions of past prophets. Right? My dog is sneezing. They have to have that, right? To explain some of the things that happened from the past that don't gel with what's, how it is today. So they say, as speaking as a man, acting as a man, fallible, yet they expect the current prophet to be infallible, like cannot make a mistake. But I think most of us go, well, wait a minute. If the past prophet was infallible, or I know I'm getting this mixed up, could make mistakes, then what about the current prophet? As soon as he passes away, then is he, so I think they can use that. They want to use that, but it's a double-edged sword. Absolutely. And we were all raised, and I don't know how they raise people today, but the prophet, he was a direct mouthpiece to God. God was speaking through him. There were no mistakes. It was what God wanted you to do. Right. So, and I've seen them lately. I saw them with the priesthood ban, apology a couple years ago at the B1 concert where it was the anniversary of the lifting of the priesthood ban. And it was actually President Oaks, that wonderful program there. And then he gave his talk and he said, that priesthood ban, we don't know why, it was God, right? They're literally just passing the buck off there. And this talk today was sort of like that too. We don't know why God hasn't given us the answers where it doesn't match with science or some of the wisdom of the world. Someday God will tell us on his own time. So it is interesting to be a mouthpiece, still just kind of waiting and able to, as you said, Ian, kick that can, or Jim, I think you both said it, kick that can. And as long as the can is kicked, please stay in. Yeah. Please stay and wait, because you don't want to leave over this, because maybe tomorrow, right, the answer is going to be there. So it is a very interesting
Rebecca, you've absolutely nailed it. We jokingly claim to be the only true podcast upon the face of the earth in whom the Lord is somewhat pleased with, and we claim to have all the answers, right? But I've got a question I'm struggling with. How do we know when he's speaking as a prophet or as a man? Can you both give me the answer? Because I don't know.
After the fact is the only way you know. After the fact. Yeah. Right. When it proves to be true or problematic or anything like that. I've seen a meme where it shows General Conference and then there's a lit up sign that says man and a lit up sign that says prophet, and they light up depending on what he's saying. But no, it's only in hindsight where what they said was problematic, like, Amish people on the moon, he was speaking as a man, right? But at the time that isn't known. So in my opinion, it's only in hindsight that you're able to label it man or prophet.
Good answer. Jim, you said you've got the answer.
I have the answer. I have the definitive answer. And I'm not kidding. He is always speaking as a man, even when he is speaking as a prophet. It requires us to better understand what revelation is, how it functions, and how we are supposed to receive it. Because we rejected a plan in the pre-earth life, and now I'm talking about as if I know anything that happens in the pre-earth life.
You're well-meaning, like Oak said.
I'm well-meaning on this. But one of the things that I was taught over and over again is this idea that Satan's plan was that we would not have to make decisions and not have to do anything other than simply be forced to do the right thing all the time, every time. Whereas the plan that we accepted is the plan where we have the responsibility to determine truth from error, to learn the good from the evil ourselves individually. And so when you look at the prophet and say, okay, at what point does the prophet say something that does not require me to exercise my agency and my judgment to determine what is true and what isn't? At what time can I punt that off to the prophet and say, oh, he was speaking as a prophet, so I don't even have to worry about it? The minute you do that, the minute essentially you're signing up for the plan we rejected. Because I firmly believe that, and we had Jacob Hansen on here last week, and I know that RFM, I'm sure, was thrilled with that. But he made a point that I think is really, really valuable, which is that fallible does not mean unreliable. Because when a prophet says something, I think their office and their authority gives that enough weight that I need to consider it and consider how it applies to me, or if it applies to me. And so I'm willing to give them that weight and authority, but I also recognize that the prophet never at any point ceases to be a man with agency and the ability to get it wrong, or the ability to say something that may apply to 97% of the church, but may not apply to me. I mean, the thing is, we have built this church on so many contradictions, on this contradiction of the idea that we get continuing revelation, and also nothing will ever change. God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Well, if nothing will ever change, then what the hell do we need continuing revelation for if it's just all the same stuff and nothing's ever going to change? I mean, these kinds of contradictions, we don't think them through institutionally. And when members start to think them through and then sort of get tripped up when they see where the contradictions are, because there are a number of them, rather than say, that's to be expected, that's what mortality is, that is the challenge that you have, we just say, don't worry about it, don't think about it, be patient sooner or later. Because if you're patient, I'm 57 years old, okay? I haven't heard anything that justifies banning Black people from entering the temple and exaltation. It's just gotten worse, not better, in terms of the reasons. Yep. What I've been patient for, and what's happened, is that the church has quietly admitted 90% of it, but won't admit finally that it's a mistake once and for all. I mean, President Oaks did that. He's like, well, yeah, this was all bad, but you can't call God a racist. It's like, no, you're right. You can't, because he's not a racist. We're the racists. We're the ones that did the racist thing. And punting it off to God is a bad idea. So we have a theology that allows for this in a way that a lot of other Christian theologies do not. And we should take advantage of that. We should embrace that. And instead, we fight it tooth and nail, all the while conceding every important point behind it. Yes, we know that there are all these problems. Yes, we know that. Just be patient. That's not an answer. Long term, that's not going to work. And either people are going to find that out for themselves and figure out how to navigate, a path forward for themselves, which I arrogantly think is what I'm trying to do, or they're going to leave. They're going to leave because you keep telling them to be patient, and the things that happen when they wait are worse. They find out more things. They discover more problems. Mm-hmm. And unless you can say that fits with our model of how the universe is supposed to work, unless you do that, if you keep saying, yeah, each one of those is an anomaly and the universe works this way, where the prophet never makes a mistake and has never done anything wrong and has never taught any false doctrine, sooner or later, you're just going to drive people away themselves. I mean, there's just no other answer to it. Anyway, sorry, I rant way too much.
This is a ranty show. I had no idea.
If you're right,
if
you're right, and it's not good that good that man is commanded in all things, we can pick and choose what we like and what we feel is right to us. What we feel right in is our own heart, our own mind, based on integrity. We like this. We believe this. We reject this. Because, cafeteria Mormonism, these pieces here assembled in this way works for us. These stuff we don't want. And I think that's a very, very healthy approach. Let's
and that's everybody's approach, whether they know it or not.
Right. It really is now. You have these people, especially in the media, where everyone's saying that's not a Mormon. They're not wearing garments. They're drinking some coffee. Oh, wait, they are going to the temple. That's weird. Wait, they did do a baby blessing. I'm talking about the Secret Lives for Mormon Wives. But people are saying what you just said, Ian. This works for me. I'm okay. God and I, this is what works for me. And I still call myself a Mormon. And it's causing this dynamic where Mormons are like, you're not a Mormon. You're like, well, what is a Mormon? You can't even say the word Mormon, but you do say it. So it is becoming, cafeteria Mormon used to be a very dirty word, right? But now it really is for me in my house. And I'm even talking about doctrines. I choose to believe, I'm speaking hypothetically, Joseph was a monogamist, right? That is a group of people who have come to that realization, and they still consider themselves members of the church. Yet for them and their house, that is what they believe, right? Over here, they believe that coffee and tea, the health benefits are great, and I'm still going to be okay and be able to go to the temple. They're going to do that. They are choosing their own reality in their life. Shocking, right? Making their own covenant path. So I think it's encouraging. I agree with you, Ian.
Yeah, no, thank you, guys. This is great. Comments, questions, Jim, that are coming in? Could we?
These are all they're all mainly comments. They're not questions, because I think we've answered every question with the genius.
We're that good. We are that good. Yeah.
No, Colby Reddish at one point said, "I left the church because Jim did not offend me." Well, I feel bad.
Okay.
And then Guy McDude says, "I might go back to church because Jim lets me offend him." So I appreciate that. Well, and RFM weighed in on your Sean Connery thing. He says, "I guess that's Jim Roger Moore then."
I'm more Roger Moore. I'm more the English version.
Roger Moore gets a really bad rap. I think that. But
I like Roger Moore.
He was my favorite in the 80s.
Sean Connery is my favorite.
Do either of you know anyone that left the church because they were offended? That is the narrative still. That continues to be the narrative. How and why were you offended? And I'm just thinking, I don't know a single person that stepped away because of offense. Like you said earlier, Jim, I know everybody that's fought like hell to stay in because it needed to be that way so that they could keep their family and the dynamic. Those are the people I know. I don't know anybody that was offended and said, well, that's it, I'm going.
When I was on my mission, we reactivated a guy who told a story of his son with a speech impediment giving a closing prayer and somebody laughing. Oh. And he was so offended, he walked out and never came back for like 30 years. And I milked that story in every Sunday school lesson I taught for about 30 years until I realized that's the only example I know of. I'm sure, I'll say to many people, for instance, look, I'm sure there are people who leave the church because they want to sin. I'm sure that's certainly possible.
But do you think the word sin means I just want to have adult behaviors like have a margarita or, have a cup of coffee? I take exception to the word sin because when the LDS Church uses it, it's usually just adult behavior, like watching a movie other than a Disney movie, right? Yeah. Or going on a vacation other than Disneyland. So.
Well, on and on, more people are doing those things and still staying in the church.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
And I think that's driving some of these leaders absolutely batty.
Yeah.
I introduced Ian to the wonders of Kevin Pearson this past week.
Ooh, interesting.
Ian had never seen this. Who's this guy? What is he saying? Because he's the one who got really upset about women, how they're wearing their garments. Mm-hmm. And he's the one who said, you're an idiot if you pray to know whether or not you should go on a mission. Yeah. And, he's part of a strain of leaders that's like, now, wait a minute. You guys are living the gospel the way you want to, not the way we want you to. And that needs to stop. Well, the reality is it's not going to stop. And you know what? It's always been happening. It's been happening since day one. It's been happening since the days of Joseph Smith. And Joseph Smith would excommunicate members of the Quorum of the 12 because they had a different understanding and were living it differently. I do think there are boundaries. I think they're broader than people realize. And I think that we're starting to understand that people live the restored gospel every Mormon is a cafeteria Mormon. It's not possible to do it otherwise. It is not possible to live your faith identically to how someone else lives theirs.
Do you see a divide? Now I'm acting like the host, not a guest. Do you see a divide in extremely Orthodox Mormons and then those that are doing what we're describing? Do you see this kind of a group sort of condensing into being so Orthodox because they're, completely opposed to this other kind of do what you want, you're okay with God. So, and that kind of feeds right into the wheat and tares scenario, which is a way to describe how it's okay that people are leaving. We knew this would happen. We knew in the end there would just be this core condensed group of the most Orthodox and devout Mormons. It kind of baked in that that's okay. I think maybe they may turn to that narrative if it becomes so obvious. I mean, Oaks today said people are leaving, so people expect this. But I just wonder if you think it really will be, such a divide. Sometimes when I think about a sacrament meeting sitting there, I think you can be sitting there and on your side is a monogamy affirmer, polygamy denier. Over here is a, restore Mormon. Here's a mother in heaven Mormon. Here's an Orthodox prepper here. And they're all Mormons and they're all sitting beside you. They're all there being counted and paying tithing. But is there a point where there's, and the church does not really weigh in on any of these groups, whether they're good or okay or not good? Is there a point where it's just so polarized that they really can't be together? And there's this orthodoxy. And, I see that with monogamy affirmers, right? I mean, that is a growing group and they're doing their own thing in a big way. It's interesting. I just wonder what you guys think.
Do you want to answer that, Ian, before I rant?
Yes. So it won't surprise you that the church is very sophisticated and very intelligent at understanding the dynamics of its membership. And it has been doing this for quite some time. We talked earlier about how the church is very effective at positioning for these, these projects and other temple projects. Very sophisticated, takes best practices from industry. It then also deploys very intelligent technique systems, methodologies in the church to understand the dynamics. Who's leaving, who's not, who's on which political spectrum you're on, whether you're gay or not, whether you're full tithing or not, how much time you attend the temple. Privately, I think they measure all the temple attendance. At some point, they'll probably communicate that in the talks to demonstrate progress, etc. The church is a very sophisticated organization and has these metrics, as I understand it, to measure and track and monitor all kinds of behaviors and activities. It does that for lots of different reasons, including but not limited to, tracking any predatory type practices, to quote Elder Holland there. And so, it behaves and operates like a large global conglomerate that you see in these big enterprises that I've seen. They use social style metrics, as I understand it, the amiable, expressive, driver, analytical. These are 4 different social style analytics which are out there in industry. And that's what these big companies do. They use these systems to position and to plan and put proposals and win literally billion-dollar projects. I've been involved in those conversations. So very sophisticated, super intelligent, knows these got access to all this information, and is as I believe and understand it, tracking and monitoring and looking for those things that are potentially at risk and could potentially be a threat or some kind of issue for the church on serious issues like sexual abuse and things like that. Jim?
Well, so I've been living with this ever since, particularly Trump's second victory. I had a really, I had a conversation. I'm trying to be. I won't get too specific about the details of the conversation. But at one point I posted right after Trump's second victory, I am terrified of being asked to sing with the Tabernacle Choir at Trump's second inauguration. And there were several members of the choir that were upset about that. And I got a text from Mike Leavitt, who's the president of the choir, former governor of Utah, former Secretary of Health and Human Services in the Bush administration, in the George W. Bush administration, spoke at my father's funeral. He was elected governor of Utah the same year my father was elected senator. And the text said, I saw your social media post. Would you like to talk about it? And I was terrified. I thought, oh, crap, I'm going to get kicked out of the choir. I went and had a long conversation with him. Very, very positive conversation with him. And he said, yeah, there were some members of the choir that were upset by this. He says, I'm not. I just want to talk to you about it. And I don't want to tell you the details of what we talked about. I don't want to speak for Mike Levitt. But the reality is that the political divisions in this church are really deep and really wide. And it's interesting, for instance, the monogamy affirmers, the polygamy deniers, whatever you want to call them, the people who insist Joseph Smith was not a polygamist. That's a boundary that the church is now drawing a line on.
Yep.
But the political extremists, it does not seem to be a boundary that the church is drawing a line on. And, I go online and I am absolutely vilified by people who see as evidence of my apostasy, not any, I'm not committing adultery. I'm not drinking coffee, right? I'm opposed to Donald Trump. And that is a line for them. That is a boundary for a lot of members of the church. Is you can't be a Mormon and be a Democrat. I'm not even a Democrat. That's the terrible thing. I mean, I'm still pretty much a Reagan Republican, but the Republican Party isn't, and so I'm this lost in the wilderness guy. But it doesn't matter. There are people who just insist you cannot. That's the most important thing, and so there are all these fissures within the church, and they aren't really a problem until the church decides which ones are a problem, and the church has decided that if you believe Joseph Smith was not a polygamist, that is a bridge too far. But if you believe that Donald Trump is called by God as the mighty and strong, whatever the hell, that's still okay. And, it's interesting, for instance, that President Oaks has sort of gingerly tested the waters on some of these. And one of the things he said was, it's never appropriate to say that you can't vote for a certain party or a certain candidate. Church came out and said you should never vote a straight party ticket. That's a lot of these things, and the extremists all insist, well, they don't really mean it, or I mean, it is so when you're this squishy. I mean, this is one of the reasons why, Ian, I think you're probably wrong that this is going to be remembered as a significant talk, because there are so many ways to manipulate what President Oaks here said that it doesn't apply to you. It doesn't apply to me. I mean, you saw that really tellingly with the Peacemaker talk with President Nelson. When he gave that talk, I think this is going to really improve how Latter-day Saints act online. Didn't make a dent. Didn't change anything, because everybody found a loophole. If I want to be mean to you and I want to be cruel, I just remember that President Nelson said, well, I'm not talking about peace at any price. There's the escape clause. That means I can be a jerk if it's really, really, really important. So what happens when you give a talk that's this squishy, and really this was pretty squishy. I don't think it was squishy when it came to identifying the problems. But I think, well, it was kind of squishy. But I think it was very squishy when it came to, providing anything close to any sort of a solution. And so it's just going to be far too easy for members of the church to go, oh, isn't this lovely? And, oh, this is what he really, really meant. And to some degree, that's the way the system works. I mean, I just sat here telling you all that we're all cafeteria Mormons. So, I mean, that's pretty much what we all do all the time on everything. But if the church really wants to draw a line in the sand and say, you can't, whatever it is. I mean, if it's really important, you can't. I mean, the whole thing about garments, in the temple, it says, wear your garments night and day. No, it doesn't. It says, wear your garments throughout your life.
Yeah.
And then they started drawing these. No. What we meant was night and day. We meant that only wear it. Don't wear it when you're in the garden. They went nuts in terms of this is where the boundary really is, because too many members of the church were drawing a boundary wider than the one that leaders wanted them to draw. But the thing is, every time you try to do that, everybody is going to find a way to draw their own boundaries for themselves. And as far as I'm concerned, that's what the gospel is supposed to be. Because I don't worship the church. I don't worship President Oaks. I see President Oaks as a man who is called with a responsibility to lead a body of saints and help. I see him as a coach, not as a dictator. And I think that when you take that approach, it's a healthier and more sustainable approach. And when you take it as, the leader of the church is the dictator who tells you what to think, when to think it, and how to think it, you're a faith crisis waiting to happen, because that is not sustainable unless you're dumb.
Jim, thank you for that. I see this as we're going to disagree. I think see this as a missed opportunity. I think there's some really important messaging in President Oaks' talk. Real quick, I know we're way over time, but give me a very, very quick lightning speed response to President Oaks's prophetic responsibility in respect to moral authority in the current climate in which we live today. Give me a quick 2-minute response, if you will, to that. Rebecca, you go first, and then you, Jim.
Yeah, he may have a responsibility or imagine that he does, but I just don't think, based on everything Jim said, and I agree, he can't weigh in anywhere, because moral authority means something different to almost every member in the church. And he's going to have a problem if he says something that appeases this group, and he's going to have a problem with that group. So I think they're just going to play all angles, which completely sort of invalidates this prophetic idea. If a prophet was a prophet, he would say something that's wildly unpopular, but everybody has to do it, and it would be on the right side of history. You hear that a lot when you look back. Was a prophet ever just wildly on the right side of history for his era, where everyone said, that's crazy? But time showed, oh no, he was prophetic in that. I haven't found anything like that yet. I'd like to see it. So, to be the moral authority, if you're representing the LDS Church, there's an awful lot of baggage back there that makes you say, how dare you stand up there and try to be a moral authority, right? There's an awful lot of problems. There's also a lot of examples of them trying to do the right thing, and individual people trying really hard to do the right thing. But institutionally, it does seem that there are a lot of missteps. And when you talk about moral authority, a lot of abuses of power and things like that. So, I say members of the church individually, my dog barks to agree, are wonderful people trying to do wonderful things within and sometimes in spite of the institution. And I stand by that. And I think that's why a lot of us consider ourselves Mormons still. I know John DeLynne's taken a lot of flack for saying that, but I say that because most of my family, almost all of my family, are inside of the church. So if I can try to help make a difference from the outside for those inside, even future family members like grandchildren that'll be in the church, I'm sure, I'm going to try to do that, even if I am vilified at this present moment, right? And talks like this, they kind of add to that. But yeah, I kind of wandered off the topic of moral authority, but I think we each have our own moral authority, and just what you were talking about, march to the beat of your own drum, right? You follow your gut. Lots of times in the church, they try to have you override your gut feeling. If you really pay attention, you'll see that's happening. Oh, you feel weird about November 15th policy? Pray until you don't. No, that's your gut telling you there's something very wrong with that, and no leader should have done that or told you that you need to be on board with it. So I think all of us need to, not follow Satan's plan, right? It really is what we're here for. If you believe in that story, the LDS story we were raised with, and that is, follow your gut and accept the consequences, right? It's not a sin, it's a consequence. So anyway.
Nailed it. Thank you. Jim?
I got a sense from President Oaks today that I started to see after President Nelson died, but saw more clearly today than ever before, that he is almost overwhelmed with the responsibility of demonstrating moral authority. And I think he's surprised by that. mean, I think that he sort of came into this with a kind of confidence. I mean, you listen to President Oaks from even as recently as 2-3 years ago, who had this sort of, lawyerly kind of arrogance that I know everything and I know all this. And now all of a sudden he feels the weight of, I need to show this moral authority. And he's almost paralyzed by it. That, I think President Oaks has very strong feelings about every controversial issue. We've heard his strong feelings about LGBTQ issues, but I think politically, if President Oaks were to speak out and say exactly what he thinks of Donald Trump, I think the majority of members of the church would just be aghast and be furious. And so I think there is this sort of paralysis of analysis where he looks at the situation and sees that, okay, I have a responsibility to exercise this moral authority, but I know what it will also do if I do. And so there's a timidity. I mean, he talks about humility, but I think there's also a timidity there. There's fear. And Greg Prince said that it's not just confined to the LDS Church, that it's born of fear all over the place because they're afraid of alienating their members. They're afraid of doing all of that. And so, from my perspective, there is a reason why I think, Rebecca, you consider yourself still Mormon, why John DeLynn still considers himself Mormon, because there is something beautiful and divine at the core of all this. I firmly, absolutely believe that. And it's the reason I'm here, and it's the reason I'm here, and this is going to sound a little too much like I'm bearing my testimony to get rid of difficult things. I'm here because I am absolutely convinced that this is where God wants me. I have had a personal encounter with deity that was not a first vision, that didn't have angels, but I had an assurity spoken to my soul that this is where God wants me and where I can do the most good and where I am supposed to bloom where I'm planted, where I'm supposed to be able, this is where I am supposed to let my light so shine. And and if that were not the case, it would be very easy for me to walk away. As it stands now, I can't think of anything that would really get me to walk away unless God were to speak to my soul and say, I was talking to somebody else whose name I will not use, who has left the church, who described that kind of an experience. Who said, yeah, I once had this experience where I felt like this is where God wants me. And then I got this experience that I was done. I didn't need to be here anymore. And this person walked away from the church. And I thought, oh, geez, well, what happens if that happens to me? It hasn't happened to me. I don't think it's going to happen to me. But there is something wonderful and beautiful and divine at the core of all of this. And there is so much human error, failure, fallibility that messes all of it up. But again, I see that as that's what the project is. I see that those are the parameters. And I don't think we're going to have healthy growth and sustainable faith until we all recognize parameters that are somewhat similar to that. And again, I really believe that President Oaks can see that and is just kind of, what do I do? I mean, that just imagine the responsibility of being introduced as the mouthpiece of the Lord, knowing, as President Oaks surely does, that you're just a guy. I don't think President Oaks has seen Jesus. I don't know if that's going to offend anybody. I don't think, he's never said that he has. In fact, he's denied that he has. He said, I don't think that any member of the Quorum of the 12 has had an experience like that. So this is a guy, and he's all of a sudden being introduced as the mouthpiece of God with this responsibility. And I think he takes that responsibility very, very, very seriously, to the point of it sort of scaring him and keeping him from being as bold as I think he would want to be.
Okay. we're going to close the podcast, and I'm going to finish off on a scary note. I have a word concerning the viewers, listeners, and followers of Inside Out. If you don't follow Inside Out live every week at 7 p.m. Mountain Time, you will be in my power. That was my best, scariest British.
I have lawyers about arrogance here. So
hope that didn't scare you too much. It certainly scared me when I was in the temple. But anyway, a little bit of fun there. So, Rebecca, you're awesome. We love you. Thank you so much. You're such a valuable contributor to this space. We love your podcast. Love what you and Landon do. We have so much love and respect for you. Jim, as always, you're just amazing insights. Thank you so much. To all of our listeners, viewers, followers, I hope I didn't scare you with my Satan role there. We look forward to seeing you again next week. We think we might be having a live episode with Greg Prince.
Next week we have Colby Reddish.
Oh.
My apologies, Colby Reddish, and probably the week after. Looking forward to having you on, Colby. And the week after, we'd like to have Greg Prince. And Jim, do you know what we're going to be talking about there? I do.
With Colby or with Greg Prince?
With Greg Prince.
Because I know both. Colby, we're going to talk about fallibility, particularly with regard to the Lowry-Nelson exchanges. But yeah, Ian, why don't you tell everybody what Greg Prince is going to talk about?
We're going to talk about the taboo subject in the church, sex. So that will be interesting. And this is a section, a paragraph or a section in Greg Prince's strategic roadmap for improving Mormonism. So it's going to be an interesting hot topic, 2 weeks tonight. I hope you've enjoyed being with us this evening. I hope you've had so much fun as much as we had. Rebecca, you're awesome. Thank you again for being here with us. Jim, thank you again. And to all of you out there, have a great rest of your week. God bless.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.